Hello, I'm Kads and welcome to today's video. So today's video is going to be a little bit different than normal. We're going to lean a little more into that whole free-to-play strategy aspect of the channel and peel back the curtain a little bit and go through a day in the life of a free-to-play raider. Now, obviously, I'm not going to show you everything that I do in real time because that would take 4, 5 to 8 hours or however long I spend in this game, but we're going to talk about the things that I do, the things I like to focus on each day, and how I prioritize what I do. So I think the best place to start is with the fact that I effectively have two different starts to my raid day. That is mainly due to the fact that time zones do exist and the game is usually centered around UTC or Universal Time Constant, and so that may or may not be beneficial to the start time or end time of events and tournaments or just things that are going on in the game. So for example, we can take a look at the playtime rewards and you can see that I've been in the game for slightly less than 2 hours, and that should tell you that we're in the second half of my raid day or the after reset part of the day. So backtracking a little bit, my official raid day does start in my actual morning, and the first thing I do is get below the caps. So that includes the energy cap, because obviously while I'm sleeping, energy is accruing and I sleep for long enough, thankfully, that it gets back up to 130. So I try to get below that. And then of course, classic arena, stuff like that. Things that reset or things that regenerate over time, I like to get rid of those. Obviously the rest of the different keys here do not refresh at a regular rate, or they don't refresh at the same regular rate, and hourly, I should say. And so I don't have to worry about them necessarily. Demon Lord, of course, is one of the things that resets every 6 hours, and so I do worry about that as well. In the morning, I typically run my Ultra Nightmare and my Nightmare runs, or I run 2 Ultra Nightmare runs. It kind of depends on how my team fares. So we can take a quick look here. Ultra Nightmare, if I could find myself. Where am I? Here we are. So this is a run where I definitely stopped it. It was around just under 90 mil, which is over 70 mil, which is what you need for the 1 key. And I run the super budget or budget super tanky team. And so it can 1 key on Spirit and it can 2 key on Magic and Force. So it's not perfect. It's not a 1 key every affinity team. That is something I would love to build in the future, but I like to keep it traditional. As you can see here, I'm surrounded by all of the Bat Eaters and all the other unkillable teams, but I'm just not a fan of unkillable teams. So maybe subject for a different video about my my crazy, wacky raid rules. But so that's my team. So in this case, I did run Ultra Nightmare first, and then maybe like 30 minutes later or something, I probably ran my Nightmare run. So this one, again, I stopped it. It can go for 100 and something million on Nightmare, and I don't really need to do that because the 1 key for that is like 40 million. So I just stop it early, just to kind of save myself the time. It's not a full auto composition, so I can't take advantage of the auto battle feature, unfortunately, but I do use that for brutal and hard, which we'll get to a bit later. So once those things are done, I basically spend the rest of my energy and my refillable tokens and keys and stuff throughout the rest of the day if I haven't used them in the evening. And one thing to note about energy specifically is how I like to use them is obviously just focusing on whatever's going on in the game. So for example, right now we have the last day of the Spider Tournament for the current Strategos Isla Fusion, at least at the time of this recording. So 7 hours to go. We can check in. I think I'm somewhere around 1900-ish. So just barely not there. Yeah. About 2,000, so 250-ish more energy, and this will be done. And so this is where I would be focusing my energy if it were in the morning, which is what I did this morning, to be fair. And so instances like this where there's only one thing going on, then obviously that's where my energy goes. For instances where you have like the pinch points during a fusion, where there's a champion training as well as some dungeon tournament going on, which would have been the case a few days ago, then usually in the morning I focus on champion training, and then I focus on the dungeons after the reset in terms of my energy usage. That decision is somewhat arbitrary and it's not a recommendation by any means, but that's just how I like to approach it, so that it's somewhat delegated when there's an overlap, so that I can focus one thing at a time and make sure that they get to their appropriate daily progress. So like I said, I do throughout the day, I log in and make sure I'm staying below the caps of energy and a classic arena token specifically. And if there's any unused resources from the previous night, then I work through those throughout the day before the reset happens. As I've probably mentioned at some point, I do also have a full-time job, so this is not my job to make these videos. And so I just find time in you know, during breaks and whatnot, during lunch and whatnot, to log in, just check in and make sure that I stay below the appropriate caps. So that basically covers the morning and the day as far as my rating goes. And so now let's switch over to the bulk of my rating, which is in the evening after daily reset. So effectively the start is exactly the same. I just make sure that once again, I am below the energy cap, just because like I said, throughout the day, I check in during work, but I may or may not have enough time to make sure I get all the way down to 0 or near 0 or whatever. So once again, just making sure I'm below 130 on the energy and below the 10 on the classic arena tokens. And then from there, I usually go straight into my brutal run if I'm all the way down on the brutal. If it's a 2 key on Ultra Nightmare, then I go into my Nightmare run. So it depends on the day. But if we could take a look here at my brutal team, which is different for a specific reason, because there is that occasional advanced quest where you have to use a rare on your demon, or use a rare during a demon lord key or something like that. I forget the wording. But so I made a quick team that's just doesn't really need much. This one is full auto battle, etc. And I know that it can do 20 million ish damage, or 22. I think it's 22. It can do enough damage. Yeah, 22 million on brutal, regardless of affinity. So it's just something that I just put in there. It's not speed tuned or anything like that. It's just a team that's predominantly there just to make sure that the rare mission is always fulfilled every day, because at least I do brutal every day. And if I have a 1 key on Ultra Nightmare, then I can go down and do hard as well. So this is one of those days. So in 20-ish minutes, I will then auto battle on hard and run that same team just in case there's that mission. And so we make sure that between brutal and hard, I get that mission done, as well as get the 1 key for all of those chests. After that, and I saved all of these for you guys, is that I come here and I make sure that I get rid of all of the different dailies, so all of these, and then I start looking at the advanced quests. You can see these as well. So I started some of them. Obviously, some of them require a little more effort, like I need to run dungeons or need to run faction wars, which we'll talk about in a bit. But I do like to make sure that I get rid of all of the quick and easy ones. Now, the next thing to mention does have a caveat attached to it, where this is what I do when it's not the day before CVC, because if CVC is coming up, then I'll wait until the next morning to do these, just because you get more CVC points. But the next things to talk about are faction wars, tag team arena, and Iron Twins. So normally I do make sure that my energy is relatively low after the reset, and then I'll just buy 1 refill, because that's how I like to approach it. So I come to the shop, I make sure to buy 1 energy refill, so I spend at least 40 gems a day on energy, and then I go to the Iron Twins and I send my team into stage 12. So I don't have a team that can fully 100% complete stage 15 just yet. That is something I'm working on, but I need a couple more champions, specific legendaries, unfortunately, that can make that team. Just because I'm not a huge fan of block damage and killable teams, and so I want a traditional team that can do this content. And so that's just going to take me a lot longer, but I don't mind waiting, and I'm not itching that bad to get a slightly more immortal soul coins here. But if you're curious, the team that I do run on stage 12, it is not free to play by any means. I mean, I guess you have some free to play aspects of it, but we're using Tuhanorak, Lady Kimmy, Mithrala, Pythion, and Ninja. So it takes around 2 to 3 minutes on every affinity, including Force, even though Ninja's negative affinity there. So it's just the high stage that Ninja has enough accuracy for, because I'm not building him to 500 or something accuracy just to do this one area, and he's also relatively squishy compared to stage 15, so he would just be on the floor for a majority of the fight and not actually be able to do damage. So eventually I do plan to replace him as the DPS with someone else. Might be Newt, might be Walking Tomb Drain. It kind of depends who works in that composition. The next thing I did mention was faction wars, and so I do come in here, and every day I do farm stage 21. Now, what you may or may not know, the difference between stage 21 and stage 20 is the amount of materials, the forge materials you get. You get the same chances for the same quality of glyphs between stage 20 and stage 21. So if you only care about glyphs, then it doesn't really matter. Do whichever one is faster. But if you're like me and you want to maximize the amount of forge materials you get, because that's more perception, which is just, potentially good gear. And it's more resilience, which is honestly just more silver. But that's just my personal preference, how I like to approach it. So I optimize my teams to fight stage 21, including the AI overrides and whatnot. And the only place where I haven't quite gotten a team that can farm stage 21 quick enough, and quick enough means somewhere in the realm of under 4 minutes, ideally, maybe 5 minutes worst case, is Sylvan Watchers, because it's somewhat new. And I was missing a champion, which is Crowd in the Blue, who we just recently got, thankfully. So maybe once I build him out, max him out, I can see how they fare against stage 21. But I honestly don't think the CC is going to make a huge difference in the time saving. I think a lot of the time was lost just because that faction just really not have a lot of good DPS. But I digress. So that's Iron Twins, and that is Faction Wars. And the third thing that I mentioned was Tag Team Arena. So you can see here that I'm sitting pretty in Gold 1, and that's usually where I stay most of the months, or most of the time. There we go. And I do like to stay in Gold just because you have access. Oh, let me buy these real quick. We'll do it live. One, you do get both access to both of the accessories, but more importantly, you have the access to the Sacred Shard as well as the Legendary Tome, and they do take a while to farm. So it's not that I can buy them as soon as they come back every time they show up, but I just kind of I optimize based on which one is coming back soon. So in this case, I think the Void Shard's coming up soon, so I'm probably going to buy that one with my nearly 15,000. But in a couple of weeks, I'll aim to have 30,000 and hopefully still be in gold. It's definitely hard to stay in there some weeks or some resets, but I'll aim to accrue 30,000 more bars and be able to buy a Sacred Shard. And then you can see the tome I bought relatively recently, so they're not perfectly in sync. Like I said, it is pretty costly to do all of these, and it's just not something that you can always do once a month repeatedly. At least in Gold 1, it might be possible in Gold 2, Gold 3, Gold 4, but as a free-to-play player, getting there would be nearly impossible without some super meta champions that I definitely do not have. So one thing to mention here about the Tag Team Arena specifically is that, or a couple things to mention. One, if it's the middle of the week, guys, you must join the movement. The Moth movement, I think, is what Chosen called it, or the Monday through Thursday movement, and set a one-man defense, or you can go in and set, a couple more just food champions in there. Make it easy. Make yourself an easy target, because that makes people attack you, which gets you into the red. And in the beginning of the week, it doesn't really matter where you are. And the lower you are, the more likely you are to get teams like this, where there's just the one-man defenses, just like yourself. And so you can farm them, get your bars. And then when Friday, Saturday rolls around, if you really want to move up or you want to stay where you are, then you start to put in your real defenses and make sure that you can maintain your rank. Another element that is noteworthy is that it only costs 15 gems for 10 extra keys, and I definitely do know that 3v3 is a very unpopular section of the game, understandably so, but 15 gems for 10 more fights, which could equate to, if you're sufficiently high enough, it could equate to a Sacred Shard, Legendary Tome, or progress towards it, or if you're in silver, then it can equate to progress towards the Void Shard every 2 weeks. And so 15 gems is relatively cheap for 10 more fights, especially again if you're farming the one-man teams, so 30 fights a day. If you can swing it, it's not that bad of an investment, and you get a decent return in terms of more gold bars than the average person. So those are the 3 elements that I would normally do just after reset, or in the case of a CVC going live the next day, then I would wait until CVC is live just to double dip and get the bonus points from CVC whilst doing those things. In this unique instance, as far as Tag Team Arena is concerned, there is actually a Tag Team Arena tournament that is starting tomorrow, which will be my actual morning by the time it goes live, 4 or 5 hours from now, which is well after my bedtime. And so in this case, kind of like pre-CVC, I'm just going to wait until tomorrow morning before I do any of my Tag Team Arena fights, because I want to maximize the points I can get in that tournament and try to place in the top 3, where I can potentially get some good Relentless gear and also max out the rewards on the right. So once those 3 are out of the way, I typically head over to the Doom Tower. So as you can see here, I already beat hard mode, and I can do all the way up to floor 120 on hard for all 3 rotations. And so I typically start with the hard version of the tower, and then once I finish that, you can see here that I switch over to the normal and I start to climb that. So I do both halves of the Doom Tower every iteration. And just to showcase here, for normal, I just run a basic 3 nuker setup, and they just clear all the waves. Different affinities, just so weak hits are mitigated by each other, and so I don't really have to think about this team. It's just 3 nukers. But on hard mode, I did put a little more thought into the team I used to run on the stages, so we can take a look at that real quickly. So as you can see here, this team is not necessarily accessible to everyone in the game, but I am endgame, so I'm going to have decent champions by the end of it. But we are using Pythion, who was a previous fusion, as well as Vlad the Nightborn, who was also a previous fusion, and Ramontu, who was obtainable for free, air quotes, by grinding hard and long enough in the game. The main thing to note here is that we're running Lady Kimmy in here because, one, she has a really powerful Doom Tower speed aura, but also she's just one of the fastest champions on my account, and she can keep the team running and sprinting through all the waves just to make sure that we go first, so we don't have to worry about the enemy waves taking turns too early. Pythion's in there for our break in case of emergency revive if everyone starts to die, but also he has a cleanse and block debuff, so we can keep the team running and keep them free of debuffs when the enemies get turns, because they're not permanently stunned or anything, so they're going to do stuff, and potentially with their A1s talk about in a second. Stultus and Vlad are just kind of a CC pair combo, they can also do damage, and so we're using brute force essentially to kill the waves. We're not doing a sear, explosion, reset, composition thing. And the Ramantu's in there as another form of CC, but not damage, just CC. So he's blocking the passives, so we don't have to deal with the Tormins and the Mortus and the Rotos and Siffis and stuff like that. So we come in there, lock their passives, get rid of all of that nastiness, and then we can just deal with them with the other two nukers. Cool thing to note here is that Vlad is actually a relatively new entry on this team. His slot was previously Hoskarul, another previous epic fusion fragment champion, and I used him because, like Stultus, he was defense based, so he's a bit more tanky. He also provided increased defense on his own, which is useful as far as powering up his own nukes, and he also had another stun, a backup stun to Stultus, who was a different affinity. But I thought Vlad was an upgrade because Vlad brings decreased defense, AoE, so we can deal more damage to the waves just because they're weaker, and it also lessens the damage that defensive based nukers might do if they get turns. And more importantly, he has block active skills, and so that means that once he gets that ability off on the waves, he's void affinity, so there's never going to be a weak hit. That means that they can't use their active ability, so we have to worry less about them not being stunned, for example, by Stultus, or if he weak hits, that we can trade off between different forms of CC. This also synergizes pretty nicely with Ramantu, who can block the passives, as we talked about earlier. So between the two of them, for example, one of the most annoying waves in the game, Siffi and Rotos, blocking the passives on Siffi only prevents her from doing the heal, but she can still place all those buffs on the team, block debuffs, increase speed, etc. So having the tandem with Vlad means that Ramantu can block her passive so she doesn't heal, so Rotos, it can be one shot, and so he doesn't cleanse himself, etc. But then we also block the active skills so she can't buff, and the Rotos can't A3 and A2 and start stealing HP and stuff like that. So in the same vein, this also works against the Mortu and Skytouch Shaman waves, where I can block the passives with Mortu, but if you block the passive on Skytouch Shaman, that means that she actually can't fear herself, which means she's guaranteed to cleanse, and then Mortu will come back to life, ready to go, and will start blocking revive. So that can be very annoying. So having the tandem of block passive skills and block active skills is very, very strong, especially on auto for running through the Doom Tower. And since we're in the Doom Tower, I should mention the secret rooms and my strategy for that. You can see here that I've basically done all of them except one. I think this is like rare HP only, and I just don't feel like grinding that out. I think the first time I did it, it took like 40 minutes or something. I'm just not in the mood to do that right now, but I did all the other ones, and on most rotations, I want to say on rotation 1, I can do all 12. Rotation 2, I think I'm short on like 1, and then rotation 3, I think I'm pretty much short that one at the rare HP, depending on my mood that month if I want to grind it out slowly. But the thing to note there specifically is that I did adopt the strategy of waiting until I get to the hard stage that I wish to farm regularly. In this case, it is floor 120. On rotation 1, I like to farm Scarab King, which I think is floor 100. And then on rotation 2, I like to farm the Griffin, which is stage 90. So I wait till I get to that stage, and then I go through the secret room, start using the silver keys to get more silver keys, and then I can farm extra runs onto the boss that I care about for that rotation. I did already make a video showcasing my Dark Fae team here, as well as my Bommel team, but I do have a team for every single boss in the Doom Tower. So if you guys want to know about anyone in particular, I could definitely make a separate video on that one in the future. So let me know down in the comment section below. So after that, we basically go back to what I was doing most of the day, where I just use my energy and use all my different tokens throughout the day. Obviously, I don't fight every single team on every Tag Team Arena page or Classic Arena page, so I wait until that 15 minutes to refresh, check again and see if there's more fights I can do, depending on where I need to use my energy. Like I said, I usually focus dungeons after reset or champion training during the day, but if there's only one of those types of events or tournaments, then I focus on whatever it is. So in this case, we're going to do a little bit more spider, but because we are skipping the dungeon divers that's going on right now, as well as the artifact enhancement that's going on right now, I think any excess energy that I have, I'm just not going to use, because there is a dragon tournament starting tomorrow for the fusion, so I'm going to save resources for that. But any extra accrued energy, I'm just going to throw it at Minotaur, just because I need mastery for champions, and there's no real benefit to overshooting the fragments for the spider tournament. A couple of things to honorably mention are that during CVC, I do a little bit of extra things. So for example, during personal reward CVCs, I do make sure to come into the forge, and you can see, because we just had one recently, I'm relatively low on the materials, but I make sure to come in here and forge all of my perception that I can for those couple of days, as well as all of my resilience. And depending on if I recently farmed a bunch of one of the Doom Tower bosses, in this case I did, I think I turned in a bunch of the Guardian set from the Griffin. That was last rotation. So in this case, we're farming the Dark Fae. So next personal reward CVC, I'll have a stockpile of lethal gear that I can forge, and so I'm going to be forging that alongside the Perception and the Resilience. The other thing to mention for personal reward CVC is that I actually hold on to all of those rares from the campaign. You can see them at the very bottom here of my vault. So all of the Hound Spawns and all of the Diabolists there, I collect them and I save them and I feed them into each other for rare tomes, because you get 500 points during CVC for each one that you feed, and they're free to obtain just by running the campaign. So I don't really need excess chickens. I don't need them as excess chickens, and so I might as well get some free points by just feeding them dupes. And again, it's free. You get it from champion training, and it's a way to get a decent amount of points every couple of weeks. So there are also things that I do regularly, but not daily. The first of which being Hydra Clan Boss. Obviously, that is a weekly thing, and so I do try to do that once a week. And usually that's over the weekend when I have more time to iterate through the runs. But in the case of in cases where I get that daily or that advanced quest, where it forces you to use the key that day, then I'll acquiesce. And usually I run like my normal key just because it's a bit faster. But we can take a quick look at some of my teams here. So this is the team I run on Nightmare, and unfortunately this is a relatively underwhelming key. I think my peak or my best was around 80 million or so, and we got some bad RNG during this run, where the Head of Mischief stole turn meter from the Mischief tank and he wasn't supposed to, and he already had one turn left on the Devouree or whatever, and so he just ate them when he wasn't supposed to, and I was very mad, but not mad enough to restart the run because I already passed the one key, so I just kind of let it go. Anyways, I digress. This is my Nightmare team. You can see it's relatively whaley, and that's kind of what's required if you want to compete with the Nightmare Clan Boss. High stat requirements, and you need a lot of champions to do a lot of different roles at once. So that is my Nightmare team. I also do one key on Brutal, and I recently reworked this team to function a bit better. Uko and like Taunting, for example, and Contra and Relentless, just so they can control the Head of Decay. That was the problem I was running into for way too long last weekend when I was trying to make sure that this team could one key on Brutal. So 40 million or 47 million there, which is more than enough. I'm still working on a team that can one key hard as my third team, because normally, or what I used to do prior to the Hydra class, was normal, hard, and brutal. But once that came out, I wanted to help the team, and you can see we're third here in the Hydra clash. But I wanted to help the clan and make sure that I can contribute on Nightmare and Brutal, and then I come back to normal with my just super nuke team here. So 40, 47, or 45 million. Just a little bit of burn, Herndig just going ham with his DPS, and then a little bit of control and hex, just so that the Head of Decay and Head of Mischief don't go completely crazy. As far as the other dungeons are concerned, I already talked about Iron Twins. I basically don't farm the potion keeps unless I'm really low or I have to ascend a bunch of legendaries at once. And so I usually don't care about the potion keeps, but if I do need to farm them for whatever day, then I'll just wait till it opens and I throw a couple of energy refills in there. Arcane, if I need to do it at all, I usually do that during CVC, just because you get points for running the keep, and I'm not in a hurry usually to ascend champions. And I also wait to ascend legendary specifically during CVC, just because you get more points. Minotaur, I kind of mentioned it a bit earlier, but I try to fill that in whenever there's gaps between events and tournaments and fusions and fragment summons and everything, which is almost never. But when there is a gap, or when there's excess energy, or there's stuff I don't need to do for that night or whatever, then I go into Minotaur and try to work on the backlog of masteries that I need for champions. The other thing to mention, of course, the last two are the latest new dungeons. Sand Devil, I basically don't farm at all unless it tells me to do it with the advanced quest, and I have a team that I just run on stage 11, which I think I showcased in a video once, or maybe a different iteration of this team. But this is the team I run now. So Sleep Champion, a couple of nukers, and some buff champion with Brogni there. And then for the Shogun's Grove, as you can tell, I've never done it. Personally, I don't see a huge need for a bunch of the extract here. Like, it's nice to have bonus stats on your accessories, but even me in the end game, that I'm not like dying for that extra bit of accuracy on a banner or resistance on a banner or crit damage on a crit damage amulet or attack on an attack amulet. Those are really the only 4 things you're going to be looking for at all. So that's very, very niche. And I'm not to the point, maybe I will be in the future, but I'm not to the point where it's like I really need all the stats on all the gear pieces ascended and, you know, amplified in that manner. So I don't really farm Sand Devil. I don't really farm Shogun's Grove. I could make a team for this. I think I theory crafted a team for this if I look here. So I haven't run it yet, but I'm using the Gnarlhorn strategy where on his A1 he cannot weak hit, and so he's the perfect enfeeble tank. So I tried to make sure that he has the most crit damage on this team so that he's the enfeeble target. And then we have Riho because he has a bunch of debuffs on a single target, Newt because he's Newt, Husk because that's enemy max HP, but more importantly has less crit damage than the Gnarlhorn that I have built, and then a reset champion who I probably would have to 6-star if I was really trying to do like stage 24, stage 25 of Shogun's Grove. But like I said, I don't do this dungeon at all, so I'm not even worried about this team's success rate and anything like that. And the last thing to mention is that I pretty regularly go through my champions and I check out their gear and see if I can make any upgrades, to the chagrin of my silver stack. But I think someone asked in the comments before, like, do I just remember all of the gear pieces that I need? And to which I said yes, to a degree. Like, I have a mental backlog of who I'm looking for. So, for example, I need more reflex gear for my Rector Drath. So yeah, we can take a look at her. So I have this wonderful piece that's like the starter. So it has resistance and speed, a little bit of accuracy and their HP percentage, and that's what I want her to be in. But I basically have nothing else for her build, so I can't put her in reflex just yet. So I need to farm Ice Golem to get that, and I'm on the lookout for pieces, especially bottom pieces that are HP, or top pieces that have speed, resistance, and HP, etc. Stuff like this, one of my primary nukers for Arena, I'd love to get him in a Savage set, but I cannot for the life of me get an attack percentage chest in the Savage set with speed and crit rate on the subs. Even if it's rare, I would take it. Do not have one. Never got one in my almost 3 years of playing this game and farming Fire Knight regularly. So stuff like that. I have mental notes, so I just kind of know what I'm looking for, and if I get a piece, I'm like, ooh, let me go put this on somebody immediately. But point being, not recommendation, because again, it's a waste of silver a lot of the time, but I do like to make sure, go through and just look through my champions and how I built them, see who's partially built or not fully built, and make sure, hey, are they doing what I need them to do? Is there a piece that I got recently that might work in their build, stuff like that. So that's just something that I personally like to do, because I think I've mentioned it many times and across different videos, but building champions is my favorite part of the game, so I definitely love to do that. Maybe too much. All right, so I think that covers everything that I do on a daily basis and some things that I do on a semi-regular basis. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the little peek behind the curtain as far as my day-to-day raiding activities, and maybe one or two of the things that I do on a regular basis is something you guys can adopt in your gameplay if it's beneficial for you. This particular topic was actually requested by one of my subscribers in a message, so if you have an idea for a video that you guys would like me to see, then always feel free to comment it down below in the comment section. As always, if you found this video helpful, then you can help me out for the algorithm and hit that like button down below. And of course, if you enjoyed the video, then be sure to hit that subscribe button down below for more content just like this one in the future. Thanks for watching and have a good one.